Okay, this is English 3E, week 5. We are in unit 3, and this is class 16. I am Jillian Percy. You should be looking at a unit that looks a lot like this, and then all the different ways to reach me. I'm in the studio right now, so if you want to talk to me while I'm teaching, 1-800-465-7144. If you want to talk to me when I'm not in the studio, 1-800-667-3703. You can fax me your work at 1-800-463-7852. You can email me any questions you have at jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. And if you want to re-listen to this recording, it is on YouTube at capital G, capital P, ERCY space, capital W, AHSA. Okay, so we wanted to talk today about colons, semicolons, and the dash. So this kind of oddball punctuation that we see sometimes, but we don't often use. And when we do use, sometimes we use them incorrectly. So I just kind of wanted to talk about how to use them in our writing. Colon can be used for multiple reasons in writing. It can be used to give emphasis. It can be used to present dialogue. It can be used to introduce lists or text. And it can also clarify composition titles. So for example, if I were using it to provide emphasis, we could have something like, he had only one goal. Can you see the colon? The destruction of his enemies. I always picture like a dramatic pause when you see the colon. It was her favorite holiday, Christmas. The sound had haunted him throughout his dreams, the memory of her screams. Okay, it also happens for dialogue. For dialogue, you would write the speaker's name and follow it by a colon and then his or her statement. You'll see this really commonly in plays, but you'll also see it in interviews or like podcast transcriptions where they want to make it clear who's talking. So this would be an example of like a play. Piggy number 1, colon, no, you can't come in. Big bagged wolf, colon, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow the house down. And this is from a question and answer interview with Chris Hadfield, who's a Canadian astronaut. The question, and then there's the colon, and then the question is listed. Then the answer is just listed by an A, colon, and then his answer is listed. So a lot of times it's just being used to clarify who's talking in this sense. It can also introduce lists, text, or tabular material. You would only capitalize the first word after the colon if it's a proper noun or if it's the start of a complete sentence. It's unusual, but it can happen. So for a list, here's what you need to bring to summer camp, colon. Sunglasses, sunscreen, 5 pairs of shorts or pants, 5 t-shirts, 5 pairs of socks, 5 pairs of underwear, 2 pairs of shoes, 1 that can get wet. So we didn't put a capital because it wasn't a complete sentence. It was just part of this sentence. When they're talking about text, sometimes we're setting off a bit of text because someone's speaking or it's an important quote, and we're trying to make it clear that it's not necessarily what we're writing. So here would be an example where Martin Luther King's most famous speech is known for this section. And there's a little colon showing that this is his text, right? Where he says, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. So this is how colons are often used to set material aside. It can also be used to clarify the titles of books, lectures, or other compositions. And I've seen it used as like the book is a heading and then there's a subheading, which this is what I would call this, right? The book's called Computer but then colon, a history of the information machine. So you don't see the colon on the title cover, like the title page, but you would see it here, okay? Semicolon. A semicolon has two general uses. One, if one or more elements in a series contain a comma, we use semicolons to separate them. So for example, if we're talking about cities, we usually put like city and then a comma and then the province. But if we do a whole bunch of those at once, it looks really odd. So for example, the concert dates this month will be in major cities across Canada. There's a colon to present the material. Toronto, comma, Ontario, semicolon. Winnipeg, comma, Manitoba, semicolon. Montreal, comma, Quebec, semicolon. And Regina, Saskatoon. Now, obviously, if you're really talking, you wouldn't say the punctuation. I'm saying it to make it clear also because I know we do have some radio customers and I want to make sure they know what I'm talking about. However, with your voice, you would give a slightly longer pause, right? I would say Toronto, Ontario, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Montreal, Quebec, and Regina, Saskatchewan. Right, so I'm exaggerating it, but the semicolon is a little bit of a longer pause when we're talking than just a comma. Two closely related sentences. I don't find we use this commonly anymore, but it's still perfectly legitimate. I just find generally we tend to use conjunctions here, but you definitely will see it in things you read, and you absolutely can use it in your writing. It's just not as common. So for the most part, you should use a semicolon only where you could also put a period and separate them into two separate sentences. Okay. If one of them is incomplete, a semicolon is not the right punctuation to use there. More likely you'd want a comma. So for example, good grades are integral to student success, semicolon. A strong support network is also important. And the semicolon is trying to show those two things are linked, right? Either sentence could be by itself. They're trying to link them. We're good there. Dashes. How can we use dashes within a sentence? Sometimes they're used to define a word. So for example, reconciliation, dash, the restoring of friendly relationships, dash, is not possible unless truth is a part of that relationship. Sometimes you might see brackets here. It can also be used to provide further explanation or summary of the material that came before the dash. He hated history, science, English, every topic that needed reading, every new school year. You can also introduce a short list that's happening within a sentence, and then you're going on. His mom had bought everything, dash, pencil, eraser, bindle, and pencil case, dash, this should be in a neon green color that he loved. Okay. Let me see if I can just pull this up real quick. It's kind of a cute little video on it. And they also cover one or two things that I hadn't talked about. I thought was kind of neat. So I'm having a bit of trouble just going directly to the YouTube. Sometimes it doesn't want to pull up the right stuff, so I'm doing it this way.
Great writing needs more than a grammar tool. Pro Writing Aid's got you covered. It strengthens the impact of your writing.
This is a semicolon. While it's probably familiar to you, its use might be a little confusing. It's kind of a punctuation hybrid, half comma, half period thing. Think of it as the centaur of the grammar world. Its hybrid nature makes it stronger than a comma, but not as final as a period. But what exactly does it do? Should we even trust it? Well, it has a number of uses. First off, it's one of the ways to connect two independent clauses. Now, I know what you're thinking. There are so many ways to connect two independent clauses. But let's look at these two. My roommate doesn't like ice cream. My favorite ice cream is mint chocolate chip. If you want to join these two sentences, also known as independent clauses, you can add comparison through a subordinate clause. Although my roommate doesn't like ice cream, my favorite ice cream is mint chocolate chip. or by using a comma paired with a coordinating conjunction. My roommate doesn't like ice cream, but my favorite ice cream is mint chocolate chip. But if you use a semicolon, the connection is more ambiguous. Instead of making a comparison, the writer is using a semicolon, the mystery connector. The writer is giving the power to the reader to decide how the two are related, and with great power comes great responsibility. Another great way to use a semicolon is to separate items on lists when those items contain internal punctuation, such as commas, as in this example. I have lived in Chicago, Illinois, Miami, Florida, New Orleans, Louisiana, and College Station, Texas. Moving is the worst. With all these commas, it's hard to tell what goes together and what is separate. So we use semicolons. Here, semicolons are more like super commas that provide even more separation than a regular comma. These super commas can also be used in lists that contain long phrases or complete sentences, such as, I decided to go to Texas A&M for 3 reasons. First, I love the Aggie traditions. Second, I wanted to learn about leadership. And third, I got a great scholarship. As you can see, semicolons can handle a lot. Now these bulky guys handle things differently from colons, so don't get them confused. Colons are more like butlers at fancy dinner parties in that they announce and introduce things in fancy accents. The colon can be used to introduce a quote such as, in Remains of the Day, the butler, Stevens, admires his workplace in this line. The English landscape at its finest possesses a quality that the landscapes of other nations inevitably fail to possess. These guys can also introduce a list. She told me to visit 3 places, Paris, Rome, and Prague. Like butlers, colons are handy to have around for all sorts of grammatical housekeeping. With time, for example, the colon is used to separate hours from minutes. Or, colons can be used to separate the volume from the page numbers in cited works. So keep these things in mind when using a colon or a semicolon, since they're both connectors in their own way. But if you have any questions, you can always visit us at the University Writing.
All right, so it's not our university, so we can't really go visit, but you could if you live there. All right, so we're going to kind of go through a few exercises where we try and use those, because if we use them in practice, then it's easier to use them in our own writing. So she knew he could be there for only one reason, murder. So where would I put a colon here? Well, after reason, if I put it there, then it sets off the word murder and gives that emphasis. Hero, I will never give up. Because this is bolded, I'm thinking that this is kind of like a play and that the colon should go there. And then these are the words that follow. Number 3, she found an old journal in the attic. When she opened it up, she read, I had the most wonderful day, and it is all because of Peter. I can't wait to see him again. Okay, so they're introducing text. So right before that, we should put a colon. Otherwise, it looks like we just forgot to add a period at the end of that sentence. Her new textbook looked like it would be interesting. A history of modern Canada, the world, the wars created. Okay, this is one of those things where I think that there's either a subheading or competing headings here, and we should put it between them. A history of modern Canada, the world, the wars created. Try my new Halloween craft. To get started, you will need green and black construction paper, glue, scissors, googly eyes, and some silver glitter. So this is a whole list. And to introduce a list, we usually use a colon. Right there. It just gives the reader kind of a heads up that a list is coming. Otherwise, you're suddenly reading it. It just kind of doesn't always make sense, right? Okay, semicolons. So we've got to figure out where the semicolons go in here. He had waited all his life for this moment. His triumph was finally here. Okay, so semicolons can have 2 sentences that are linked. So that is how this one sounds. Where would the first sentence end then? He had waited all his life for this moment. I could put a period there, but this is where I'm putting the semicolon. And the idea is that he had waited all his life for this moment is linked to his triumph was finally here. We are touring in several cities, Detroit, Michigan, Chicago, Illinois, and Cincinnati, Ohio. Okay, so just like with Canadian places. They have a city and then a state, and we put the semicolon there to make it clear, right? If we put the comma there, it would make it sound like they were all equal, and like there was like 6 different places rather than 3 different places. It would be kind of confusing. Being an Olympian requires total dedication. Every moment is scheduled and planned in order to get the most out of every day. That sounds like a run-on sentence, which makes me think that it is probably 2 sentences joined by a semicolon. So I'm going to try and see where the first sentence ends. Being an Olympian requires total dedication. Total dedication. That right there, that's the end. And then just to check, every moment is scheduled and planned in order to get the most out of every day. Yeah, okay. So that's where my first sentence ends. And so we're using the semicolon to join 2 sentences. She looked at her calendar to see what was available. Monday, September 18th, Tuesday, October 17th, Monday, October 30th, and Tuesday, November 14th were all that was left. Okay, so this is the same thing where we would put between Monday and the month, we have a comma, and then before we start another date, we put a semicolon to make it clear it's a new date. Tuesday, October 17th, semicolon, Monday, October 30th, semicolon, and Tuesday, November 14th were all that was left. And you can see we make sure to put a semicolon before that and, okay? It's supposed to go there. And then dashes. Where do we put the dashes? I find when we're doing like messaging, we put dashes kind of wherever we want emphasis, a little bit like how we use the colon. But in academic writing, it's a little more strict as to where we put it. Did we read that? All right, for definitions, to provide a summary or to introduce a short list within the middle of a sentence. The grumpy old man was a born contrarian, a person who rejects popular opinion. Okay, so they're introducing a definition there. Okay, hang on. Oops. Okay, there had been so many failed business attempts. The t-shirt shop, the newsstand, the restaurant, the bookstore, that he no longer had any hope he could succeed. Okay, there's a list in the middle of that sentence. Right about here, they start listing all the businesses that failed. And then here's where they stop listing the businesses that failed. And I can put a dash there. And that makes the sentence make so much more sense. You only need a few supplies, flour, eggs, butter, to start making cookies. Okay. Right here is a little tiny list starting. Flour, eggs, and butter. And then the list ends here. So we're going to use a dash to kind of close it there. So it just sets off the list visually so you can see it. It helps you read it and understand what's going on. Okay. So we're going to move on. Here's this week's assignments. Yesterday we did the work on Shemaiah by Susan Aglichark. We looked at how to examine our own values, and there was 3 assignments that were related to that. So today we have a story called, I've written Along in the Ocean. It's not Along, it's Alone. I apologize. Alone on the Ocean. And then there's 4 assignments that go with it. So I'm going to skip over this. This is tomorrow's. So these are our assignments. I want to make sure I give you guys some backstory because I'm worried that the story won't make a lot of sense without some historical background, because it's a memoir based on some events that happened in Vietnam. And I'm worried that a lot of you may be very young and not necessarily know about all the history of Vietnam, other than that there was a war. Okay. In 1954, the nation of Vietnam was divided into 2 distinct zones along the 17th parallel. There was a communist party that governed North Vietnam, and then there was a more democratic party that governed the South. And the Vietnam War started in 1957 when the communist Viet Cong rebelled against the South Vietnamese government. Okay. The war became kind of a proxy war of the Cold War between the States and Russia. United States supported the government of South Vietnam and sent in ground troops in 1965. Canada was not hugely involved in this war, by the way. 10 years later, South Vietnam's capital, Saigon, fell to North Vietnamese forces. The fall of Saigon triggered waves of migration out of Vietnam. It was a huge, huge event. If you look online on YouTube, there's all sorts of videos about it. I'll do a little tiny one later. Political oppression, poverty, and continued war were the main reasons Vietnamese fled their country. The desire to leave was especially great for Vietnamese who fought for the South, worked with the United States, or held positions in the South Vietnamese government. Now, they're not explaining the reasons why. The reasons why is because those people were targeted by the incoming new government. And by targeted, I mean either killed or jailed. So political oppression came in the force of re-education camps. South Vietnamese leaders were often sentenced to attend these camps. Re-education camps were essentially political prisons where inmates were indoctrinated into the ideology of their new government. 1 million Vietnamese were sent to re-education camps. Torture was not unusual. In fact, it was pretty common. And thousands of Vietnamese tried to escape because obviously nobody wants to be a part of that. There's more going on. Vietnam is bordered by only 3 countries: Cambodia, China, and Laos. The problem is Vietnam was at war with Cambodia. Cambodia was supported by China, and Laos had a communist government as well, and it was supported by the new government of Vietnam. So the only real way for the Vietnamese people who wanted to escape was to flee by the sea. By 1978, more than 500,000 Vietnamese had tried to leave their country in small, unseaworthy boats. These are like tiny little fishing boats, right? You wouldn't attempt to cross the Atlantic Ocean in a little boat. They wouldn't normally in these boats either. They would just kind of fish in their waters. The thing is, they had no choice. They didn't know what else to do. It was risk your life on the boats or stay. And for some people, the certainty that they'd be killed was pretty strong. Some boats were so small they could only carry a single family. Others were bigger and held hundreds of refugees. These Vietnamese migrants were named boat people because of their method of escape. A lot of them did not travel far. Many went to the southwest, the Gulf of Thailand. 4 main destinations: Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Hong Kong. Some made it as far as Japan and Australia. Some even made it as far as Canada and the US, although many times they had some help as far as that goes. I'm not going to read all of this, but in the United States, Congress passed the Refugee Act of 1980, allowing Vietnamese refugees to come directly to America if they had family in the US. About 725,000 Vietnamese settled in the US after that war. By 2000, there was more than 1 million people of Vietnamese ancestry living in the United States, which was about 11% of all Asian Americans. Most Vietnamese refugees settled in California, Illinois, New Jersey, and New York. And I apologize, I didn't have anything quite so specific for Canada. I don't think the number is quite as high. Why did so many Vietnamese become refugees? There was a lot of chaos when the war ended, and there was a very big event called the Fall of Saigon, which we'll watch in a second. Some people at the very beginning, while the US government was still there, were able to get on helicopters. There was about a 12-hour helicopter rescue. Those people were the lucky ones. Many people wanted to get out, but couldn't. At that point, the North Vietnamese had taken over and treated the South Vietnamese pretty brutally. Many had all their possessions taken, businesses taken, they were jailed, they were killed. So many Vietnamese fled in small boats in order to escape this fate, and they traveled across the ocean to other lands, trying to find a place to get them in. See if it'll. Oh, hang on a second. See if it'll let me do it. Sorry, because it does involve war, it's a bit of a restricted vehicle. There's nothing that bad, I don't think, but let's take a quick look and see if it'll let me do it. Oh, what happened there? Oh no, it will not let me do it. Okay, sorry. That's funny. I was not expecting that. Okay, what about this one? See, this is actually like a Canadian heritage
Zoho Creator
moment.
is a low-code application
So
development
it should
platform
play.
that has helped organizations of different sizes to
Hang on a
modernize their IT. Build custom applications for your unique business needs faster using our intuitive drag-and-drop interface. Try Zoho Creator.
My mother said we had to leave home.
But we had to go. We had no choice. Yeah, because the communism government come.
The Trins were among 1 million refugees who fled Vietnam in the mid to late 70s after the fall of Saigon. Up to 400,000 of them died at sea, but a rickety, overcrowded fishing boat was the only way out for Sam, Rebecca, and their young daughters Helen and Judy. The family left virtually everything they had behind. Twice, pirates boarded their boat and took the rest.
They look very mean. They carry axe, knife, and gun. They took everything from us. Gold, jewelry, and even our wedding ring.
Judy Trin is a freelance journalist living in Ottawa who regularly contributes to CBC.
Help and why some people are giving up. The story tonight on CBC News.
It was her account of the family's story that inspired the Heritage Minute. She was just 4 years old when they escaped. Gnawing hunger outweighed any fear of pirates. She remembers her mother frantically looking for anything to stop her crying while the dangerous marauders were on board.
It was a flattened taro root bun. It may have been there for days, it may have been moldy, but it was enough for her just to hand it to me and for me to eat, just so I would stop crying.
But that was not the most harrowing part of their journey.
The most frightening thing was when we arrived close to Malaysia, the Coast Guard, they wouldn't let us stop.
The captain sunk their boat. The Trins had no choice but to throw the children in the ocean and swim for shore.
Want to make a quick decision how to get off the boat as soon as possible.
Jump down into the water. I arm the Judy and swim to the song.
They spent 3 months in a refugee camp. Then came the Canadians, posted at camps throughout the region.
Did you study French in school?
Scott Mullen was one of the Canadian immigration officers interviewing hundreds of people each day. There were no records, no computer databases. So as Mullen told the CBC's Peter Mansbridge back in 1979, decisions were made mostly on gut instinct. 38 years later, Mullen is moved to tears watching the Heritage Minute's portrayal of this pivotal role in Canada's history.
As we go through debates, as we did not so long ago around the Syrians coming, we sometimes, forget to look back a little bit and say, we have a tradition of actually doing this reasonably well in Canada.
Certainly, the Trin family is a success story.
It's a miracle, and we were aware that we had to give back.
Nobody wanted us.
Welcome to Canada.
Canada chose us.
Canadians opened their borders, their homes, and their hearts to more than 100,000 refugees fleeing persecution after the Vietnam War.
Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Calgary.
Okay, so this is kind of the backstory behind a certain heritage moment. I don't know if you've seen these heritage moments. They're like little tiny moments that come on like around when you have commercials, if you have like old-fashioned TV. And it kind of explains a little piece of history that they want to make sure Canadians know about. So they kind of gave you little bits and pieces of it. Want you to kind of see the whole thing here.
This isn't a petting zoo. It's a prehistoric playground of epic proportions where you can move as fast as a raptor.
My mother said we had to leave home. The communists were going to take my father away. If my parents were afraid, they didn't show us. But we would never forget our escape from Vietnam. We were lost.
What was your job in Vietnam?
University professor.
We had no home.
Do you have any family in Canada?
No, sir.
Nobody wanted us.
Welcome to Canada.
Canada chose us.
Canadians opened their borders, their homes, and their hearts to more than 100,000 refugees fleeing persecution after the Vietnam War.
We were home.
Okay. So I just wanted to share a story. I have a friend who escaped from Vietnam when he was only 3 years old. His older sister hid him in a suitcase and smuggled him out of Vietnam, leaving behind their parents and many brothers and sisters. He grew up with the goal of constantly working and saving money so that one day they'd be able to bring his family over to Canada to join them. It took many years to save enough money to sponsor the whole family, which ended up being about 10 people. And by that time, some of the brothers and sisters were no longer sure they wanted to come, as they had started new lives of their own at that point. But due to how the sponsorship system works, they either had to all come or none of them would come, and they'd have to start the process over. So everybody came and they all lived in a big house together at first. And gradually the young people got jobs and found homes of their own. And they built new lives for themselves here in Canada. But it all started with a brave young girl who hid her brother in her suitcase as she got out of Vietnam. So we're gonna hear the story next. At one point, the author mentioned something called a proof of sponsorship. And I want to make sure that you understood what she means when she says that. This is a very important document, okay? If you're an immigrant, it basically states that you have family in Canada and that they are agreeing to be financially responsible for you. This is a really key component that helps some refugees get into Canada, because it means that the government is not going to have to financially support these people. So it opens a door that otherwise would not be open. Okay. And then, this is the story called Alone in the Ocean. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, it's as loud as it can get. Well, we'll see if this works. It's a memoir, so it is a memory of an actual event. My escape from Vietnam was the most dangerous and most difficult experience of my life. At dawn on October 14th, 1978, my mother, brother, cousin, and I went to Vietnam, each of us carrying a small bag of clothes and another bag of dry food and water. We gathered together at the place where we had registered with the government and waited for the bus to the port. I was surprised by the number of people who were also waiting to leave. The people were all excited when the buses came. We packed ourselves in the bus because we were afraid to be left behind. Our bus started to go, followed by my father, uncle, and cousin on motorcycles. Our hearts were all as heavy as the overloaded bus. When we arrived at an unknown port in a small village, we were met by some officers who called our names and studied our faces, matching them with the pictures on their lists before they allowed us on board. That was the moment when I felt very concerned about leaving my father. I swallowed my tears and kept my eyes shut. My heart was crying bitterly inside as if thousands of blades were cutting it. Then my father said to me and my brother, "You have to listen to your mother and take care of each other. Do not complain about any hardships, because the most bitter of the bitter you suffer will make you into the best people." I was as heavy as a stone when I heard these words. Suddenly I heard our names being called and we kissed each other goodbye. We dragged ourselves on the boat with heavy footsteps. We started our adventure on a small boat, only 60 feet long. It carried 230 people. Our baggage and food were thrown into the cabin, and the women and children were forced to jump down into the cargo hold. It was all in darkness, and we could just sit on the floor with bent knees. Soon the hold was filled with people packed in like sardines. I fell asleep as the boat swayed. Soon everyone got seasick, and babies began to cry. My throat was burning so much that I needed water. For 2 days, I could not keep anything in my stomach. On the third day, I needed to go to the washroom, so people on the deck pulled me out. I felt as if I had been freed from hell, and that it had been years since I had had fresh air. Greedily, I inhaled the fresh sea breeze. I decided not to go back down into the hold anymore, and so I hid in a corner by the rail. We were all alone in the Pacific Ocean. There was only an endless view of water and sky. I often saw some dolphins leaping around our boat, but to me they seemed evil rather than playful. In the night there was a storm with heavy rain pouring down, and gusty wind blowing so sharply I was quivering and chattering all night long. On the fourth day we saw some large ships not far away. Eagerly we put up an SOS flag to ask for help, but they all steered away from us at full speed, as if they had just seen a group of violent animals. I was so depressed by their indifference and selfishness. Perhaps they were afraid they would have to share food with us. With disappointment again and again, we went on, slowly under the fiery sun. Once we thought we were in luck because we saw a glistening boat which looked like an island. As we got closer, we found that it was a gigantic aircraft carrier. Even its life raft was bigger than our boat. We used all our strength to shout out to get the sailors' attention. When a few people came out, our captain spoke English to them to explain our situation and begged them to let us aboard because our boat had lost its direction. But they refused to accept us and pointed in the direction of Malaysia. The next morning we were happier because we saw some mountains and seagulls, which suggested that there were people not far away. In a few hours we saw 2 Malaysian fishing boats, and the fishermen helped us land on an island. I had expected to be met with delicious food and drinks, but the Malaysians there did not welcome us, and instead guarded us closely with rifles as if we were criminals. We had to continue our boat life, even though we were on the land, because we had to share the little food that was left over. That night we slept on the sand facing the beach under the open sky. I felt sad because only beggars did that in my native country. We were noticed by a patrolling boat the next morning. Some Malaysian officers landed with guns pointing at us and searched our baggage to see if we had any gunfire. They were very severe and ordered us to get back into our boat and leave that island. But fortunately, our boat was damaged and could no longer move. Then they sent 3 motorboats to take us to a Vietnamese refugee camp, which was far away from any town. Da Dang was an island with nothing but mountains and trees. By the time we got there, there was more than 10,000 Vietnamese occupying the place. The trees at the foot of the hills had been cut down for cooking. Spaces were built up for plastic tents. So we were assigned to go up and live on the mountain, where we cleared the land. The Malaysian soldiers were corrupt. They changed our US dollars into Malaysian money and bought our jewelry for very low prices. Besides, they sold us necessary products such as food at very high prices. But we had no choice because we needed all those things to survive. Life in the concentration camp was similar to Robinson Crusoe's. We had to build our tents with some long branches and sleep on the ground. We had to climb up over the hill to get a bath in a stream. We had to cut down trees to get wood for cooking, and we had to get water from the wells. If it was raining, we had to cook under the tent and stay outside in the rain. Life was so hard that we had nothing to worry about with the next meal. The Canadian High Commission decided our fate. We had been waiting for 2 months to meet the Canadian delegation, but they visited the island just once a month, and they could only interview a few families. We were supposed to wait at least 1 year for an interview. However, we had brought proof of sponsorship of my aunt in Canada. It was very hard to talk to the officials because they did not meet anybody except those whose names they called. One day, my brother and I waited outside until one of them came out for some fresh air. Although we did not speak English that well at the moment, he understood us when he saw the sponsorship form. Immediately, he had an interview with my family, and after asking some questions and filling in some forms, we were accepted. We were all so delighted that we could not sleep all night. Our names were called to leave for Canada a few days after the interview. We could hardly believe it until our names were called again and again throughout the loudspeakers. We immediately packed up and left the evil island for a small town. We were put in a big villa with about 200 people who were also accepted for Canada. We waited there for 2 months as they checked our health. Supplies there were sufficient and we could buy some other things at the local stores. We enjoyed living there more than at Bedong, and so 2 months passed very quickly. One day our names were added to the list of those going to the capital for some documents, and then for Canada. The day I left Malaysia was the most meaningful day for me. When I stepped onto the plane, I knew that all the evil and hardship were left behind me forever, and glorious days were waiting for me ahead. I had been living now in Canada for 2 years, and I've grown to love this country, but I feel guilty about the material comforts and the freedom I enjoy here while my father is suffering in Vietnam. I will use whatever strength I have left to get my father out as soon as possible. I also pray that those still on the sea are secure. My escape from Vietnam by sea will haunt me until the day I die. Okay, so that's the end of the read aloud. And here are the assignment questions that go along with this story. In the story, Alone in the Ocean, Donna's father says to her and her brother, "Do not complain about any hardships, because the most bitter of the bitter you suffer will make you into the best people." What do you think he means by this statement? They want at least 2 sentences. I would suggest even 3. Next, using an atlas or a map of the world, locate the countries of Vietnam or Malaysia, then identify 3 other countries that are found in this region of the world. If you find a map that shows Russia and China, you should be able to find Vietnam and Malaysia, just so you know. It's down in this area, okay? Number 6, why do you think so many people were wanting to leave their home country of Vietnam with a goal of coming to Canada to live? And I would suggest 3 sentences for your answer to that question. We talked about it, and we talked a little bit about the videos and stuff. Briefly describe Donna's journey in the story, physical and emotional, from its beginning in Vietnam. 1 paragraph containing at least 6 sentences. That's going to be 8 marks. Since it's 8 marks, I would strongly suggest 8 sentences, okay? This is a narrative paragraph, not an informational paragraph, but the basic format is still the same. You've got an opening or a topic sentence, and then you got your details, 1 down to 6. Then you have a concluding or a closing sentence. Because this is a narrative paragraph, it might not restate the opening. It might instead end with a final physical or an emotional step, or maybe a description or summary of the emotions of the overall journey. Because they state to tell her journey from the beginning, this is a clue they want you to retell the story or summarize the story in order or chronologically, okay? Important points when you're summarizing a longer story like this: you do not need to mention every detail, thought, or statement. There's no way to do that in 6 sentences. Think about which events are really important and drive the story forward, or events that make a big difference for the main character. Don't leave out really big chunks of information or stop summarizing in the middle of the story because, well, the assignment said we only had to write 6 sentences. If you need more sentences to explain the story well, please just use them. Don't do the minimum, okay? The overall summary should make sense. It should be really clear from the beginning who the main character is, where the setting is, and what the main problem is going to be. The summary should also include the different attempts to solve the problem or major plot points. The summary should include how the problem does eventually get resolved and how the story ends. So here's a sample of a poor summary of Cinderella. This girl decides to go to a ball, but she has no dress. And a lady shows up and magically makes her one. She goes to the ball and meets the prince and has a great time dancing with him. Then she runs away and loses a shoe. The prince runs around looking for her and finally finds her by putting the shoe on her. They get married and are happy. So the above paragraph does have 6 sentences, but is it a good summary of the Cinderella story? No. Why not? Well, first of all, it misses a whole lot of events at the beginning of the story, and it doesn't explain the real problem very well. Like, it isn't just the missing dress that means she can't go to the mall. There's a lot more events in the middle that are left out. The reason why she loses the shoe isn't explained very well either. It isn't really explained how the prince ever finds her. No one's names are used. It's all quite vague. Here's a slightly better summary. A girl named Cinderella lives with her stepmother and two stepsisters who hate her and make her do all the chores. One day, a huge ball is announced, and all the sisters are excited to go as well. Cinderella is told she can go as well as long as all the chores are done. However, at the last minute, Cinderella's dreams are crushed when the evil stepsisters destroy her dress and go to the dance without her. Her hopes are lifted again when her fairy godmother shows up to help her go to the dance by magically creating a dress, some shoes, a carriage, and some servants. She is warned that the magic will all end by midnight, so she must be home before then. Cinderella has a wonderful time at the ball and dances with the prince so much that she forgets the warning until the last moment. She runs away, leaving only a glass slipper behind her. The prince vows to find her. He travels the land, going to every house and trying the shoe on every girl. He finally finds Cinderella, and when the shoe fits, he knows it is the girl from the ball, and they get married as the story ends. Okay, so it took me about 9 sentences to retell the story more thoroughly. The last sentence probably needs a little bit of work. It's a bit too long, I think. Maybe I change this into a semicolon. Oh, maybe that would work. Anyways, if I spend a bit more time, I might actually be able to shorten this a bit more and still include all the main information. What I'm trying to stress here is retelling the main events is way more important than just writing the exact number of sentences, okay? The number is meant to be a minimum, like don't write less than this. It is not a maximum. You are free to write some more sentences if that helps you, okay? What makes this a better retelling? Well, first of all, right at the beginning, I've told you who's in the story: Cinderella, stepmother, two stepsisters, and kind of told you the main big problem. They hate her and they're making her do all the chores, right? That's why she's called Cinderella, because she's always by the fire where the cinders are, right? And then because of this, the next big problem goes, which is there's a big dance. That's what a ball is, a big dance. She wants to go. She's told she can go as long as her chores are done. But at the last minute, she's suddenly told, no, you can't go. The stepsisters destroy her dress and they go on without her. So I'm explaining what's going on, right? I'm also explaining each character. Like fairy godmother, I don't think ever has a name. I explain what the magic is doing and the warning. I also explain why she lost her shoe, right? She's running away, trying to get away before that clock strikes. Maybe I can explain that better. How does he find her? He goes around, he tries the shoe on every girl, and then he finally finds her and they get married, right? The big thing is I'm just providing more detail, so it just makes a lot more sense. Reading this, you kind of understand the story. Reading the previous one, it's a bit confusing. Now you can see this is like 9 sentences. This is 6, but it's 6 really short ones. So it just isn't enough information, okay? So as you're doing your summary of the story that we just read, please be conscious. It's like 4 pages. It's going to take a little bit to summarize all that stuff, okay? Take your time, look at each page, think about what's important emotionally or important physically, like if they go somewhere new or something big and new happens, all right? I really appreciate you coming out and listening today. If anybody needs some extra help, I'll be back in the office for the next hour and you can give me a phone call. And otherwise, I will talk to you guys again tomorrow.